electrification is this big test of, can we build big things in the country? Can we grow an economy that doesn't have a lot of greenhouse gas emissions and gets us to zero and have good jobs? And right now we're failing that test in a major way. We're basically saying we can't handle this load, this increase in electricity demand. This is too scary. We have been here before. Previously, we did it with fossil fuels. We got to do it with clean energy now.
Hello and welcome to Why Is This Happening with me, your host, Chris Hayes. You know, there are two, I think, sleeper issues right now in American politics that aren't getting any attention really in national political discourse, but I think are huge sleeper issues, particularly because they relate to affordability. And affordability is like cost of living is the number one issue in poll after poll after poll. It's the number one issue under Biden. It was clearly the driver, I think, the definitive issue in 2024, but it has continued. It's the thing that Donald Trump is doing the worst on. In all the polling, when you go issue by issue, his lowest approval ratings come on cost of living. And that's because people still feel very squeezed. And housing is one place where it's clear. Groceries remain quite elevated, particularly things that are subject to tariffs. There's two issues that I think are sleeper issues, and they both relate to climate change. So one of them is insurance. We're seeing insurance costs go up. That's particularly true in places like Florida that are very exposed to climate effects, and in California. And, you know, insurance on homes is one of those costs that for most middle class folks, it's rolled into a mortgage often if you're a homeowner. So it's a little bit of an invisible cost and you don't like quite see it. And it's sort of part of home ownership. It doesn't like jump out at you the way that like when you go to fill up your gas tank, you see this price in front of you, or when you go to the groceries, right? So it could be a little hidden. But as those insurance costs go up and up and up, people are starting to feel the bite from them. It's starting to affect whether people can even buy homes. So that's one issue. That's a climate related issue. The other is the cost of electricity. And I think this is going to be a huge sleeper issue. And here's why. Again, if you have worked in or been yourself in working class homes, you know how big a deal the cost of electricity is because it's an absolute necessity. And in many cases, folks that are struggling have to cut back on everything else to not get the electricity turned off. And then getting the electricity turned off is a huge deal, and getting it turned back on is a huge deal. And in the lives of America's tens of millions of poor and working poor, this is a constant battle. If you're a level up from that, if you're middle class, again, it's a cost, but it's not one you're really, really focused on and noticing. Everyone's got the story about the dad turning off the lights and stuff like that, right? But it doesn't sort of bite. But right now we are seeing electricity costs spike across the country. I mean, they're going up at pretty insane rates. And like insurance, they're going to start to come to the front of mind for people. And the story behind that electricity spike in prices is a fascinating one, and also has a lot to do with the explicit policies at the federal level of Donald Trump, who is weirdly waging a war on cheap energy. Like truly, truly, he is doing exactly what the right accused the left of doing for decades vis-a-vis climate policy, which is to use government policy to destroy cheap energy. And right now we are on the precipice of what could be a full-grown electricity crisis. I think it might be around the bend. And I wanted to talk about it because I'm fascinated by it. I think it's a sleeper issue. And I'm really excited to talk to someone who is a uber wonk on this. Kostas Samaras is a researcher in climate, energy, and emerging tech. He's director of Carnegie Mellon's Institute for Energy Innovation. And he worked in the Biden administration where he was chief advisor for the energy transition in the Biden-Harris White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Kostas, it's great to have you in the program.
So great to be with you, Chris.
First, let's just start. We'll put insurance to the side. I've done podcasts on that, but let's talk about this. Do you buy the first part of my spiel there that energy is about to sort of become a much more salient issue for people and cost for people?
Absolutely. Costs are going up. Electricity costs are rising faster than inflation for residential customers. And there's been polling that shows 3 in 4 Americans are worried about their energy bills. And if I can tie it back to insurance just for a second, I know you've done shows on this. When the insurance costs go up, then consumers are trying to figure out things that they can cut back on, they can squeeze on. And the energy costs their electricity costs are also squeezing them. So you can't opt out of insurance. You can, but you can forego air conditioning, or you can be
Right.
unsafe when it's very hot. So the insurance story is an added stress on
That's a great
top
point.
of the electricity bills, and climate is driving all of this.
Right. And because insurance is inflexible, like you don't get to you're not deciding. You get a premium, you're going to pay it every month. Electricity is more flexible. It's a place that you can pare back. That's those two are related.
Yeah.
So there seems like there's a few big things driving this increase in electricity costs. Some on the demand side, some on the supply side. Let's start on the demand side, where it seems to me there's sort of two big things happening. One is more and more things are being added to the grid, which is good. We want that for climate reasons. And the other is the big AI boom and build out. So maybe we can start with the first and move to the second.
I want to go way back to the 70s. And so in the 60s, electricity was growing at 7% per year, electricity consumption.
Okay.
And in the 70s, so we're building out after the Second World War. We're building all these massive coal plants and nuclear plants. So 7% per year growth. Then in the 70s, 5% per year growth. And then in the kind of the 80s, slowing down to the 3% per year growth. In the 90s, kind of 2 to 3.
Wow.
And it wasn't
so kind of leveling off from the 70s.
Yeah. And it wasn't really until early 2000s, that electricity demand growth just kind of slowed down to almost nothing, right? Basically zero, 0.5% or so. And one of the reasons is a lot of industries moved offshore that use a lot of electricity. But a big savior in this is we did energy efficiency in a major way. If you remember those old compact fluorescent bulbs, and then we transitioned to LED bulbs, and then we have upgrades in home energy efficiency. So energy efficiency stopped the growth of electricity demand basically for the last 20 years.
Wow.
And
that's wild. I don't think I quite realize that.
I mean, energy efficiency plus the offshoring of heavy industry. And we are now reaching the limits of what has been done with energy efficiency while we're adding lots of new load growth to the system. And so, yes, it's about data centers, but it's also about construction and factories and electric vehicles and heat pumps and all the things that we want to electrify in the United States to deal with climate change and to grow our economy and have good jobs. That is the kind of the background story here is electrification is this big test of, can we build big things in the country? Can we grow an economy that doesn't have a lot of greenhouse gas emissions and gets us to zero and have good jobs? And right now we're failing that test in a major way. We're basically saying, we can't handle this load, this increase in electricity demand. This is too scary. We have been here before. Previously, we did it with fossil fuels. We got to do it with clean energy now.
So just to put a final point on this, because this is people, I think a lot of people listening to this know this, but for those who don't, I mean, there's a ton of things that we do in terms of energy that we do through burning fossil fuel. And I want to forget about, the burning of coal or natural gas that go into the grid. I mean, things off the grid, right? So, there's all kinds of, there's furnaces in people's houses, right, that are heating their homes, or hot water that they're burning fossil fuel. There's combustion engines in cars. There's all kinds of heavy industry that use, fossil fuel directly. One of the huge parts of the clean energy transition and meeting our Paris climate goals and avoiding cooking the planet past 2 degrees is that we got to move all that stuff onto the grid. Because once you electrify it, then you can change the sort of sources of it. So electric cars are one example. Heat pumps, right? Replacing boilers and furnaces with heat pumps. But that means adding a lot more things that are electric in the everyday home, in residential, in commercial use than we've had before.
I think that the general public, even in climate land, doesn't really grok how much electricity that we're going to need in order to not drive on gasoline or not heat our water heaters with natural gas. And these are all things that we want to do. And we haven't yet made a national project of, we're going to grow the highway system of the 21st century, which is the electricity grid. in a way that enables us to meet our climate goals and our economic goals and our employment goals. We're kind of nibbling at the edges of what a giant problem is, and we're kind of running out of daylight to fix it.
Well, what would it mean? I mean, what would it mean to actually solve it at scale?
If you flipped over every single car and SUV in the country to electric tomorrow, now we won't do that, it'll take some time, but flipped over tomorrow, round numbers, it's like you need another 25% total electricity generated in a year. And so you will absolutely feel that. We will,
that's just electric vehicles. If we go full electric, that's a 25% increase in the supply on the grid you're going to need.
Absolutely. And forever.
And that's a bigger, to be clear, like even when we were building out the grid at our fastest rates in like the 60s and 70s, that would be like, that would take like 3 years to get there, or 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, it's something where we in kind of climate land have said, this is what we want to plan for. We want to plan for electrification, because the things that you rattled off, heat pumps, dryers, stoves, water heaters, cars, factories, if we don't electrify those, right, we have zero chance of meeting our climate targets. Zero. And so there's this kind of two competing problems of this equation. We need a lot more electricity, and we need a lot less carbon. And in order to do that, we have to solve for time, right? It's like if we're doing this in 20 years, the grid is, a century plus old. And the amount of building as well as efficiency that needs to happen really hasn't entered the public consciousness yet.
So what is that building? So we'll get to supply in a second. So to stay with demand, right? So that we have huge demand, like that 25% figure is really useful, right? Just to stick in your mind, convert every car, you're looking at 25% increase in draw on the grid. How much a role do AI data centers play? I mean, at some level, I know it's smaller in scale than like converting every car, but the level of capital investment is basically unlike anything I've seen in my lifetime. And I know in local situations, it's putting incredible strain. And I also know that all of these companies that are building out these huge AI data centers are often looking for cheap energy as part of their deals. And in some cases, as in the XAI data center outside Memphis, resorting to like really dirty energy. I think they're basically running off diesel generators, if I'm not mistaken, which is completely insane outside Memphis. So how big a deal is the AI build out in terms of the demand crunch?
Data centers and AI are the energy story right now. And this also has an interesting kind of 10-year history. So in the early 2010s, there was a similar panic. And it wasn't about AI. It was about data centers and the internet and digitization. And it was, look at the rate of growth of data center electricity use in the United States. And if we extrapolate this out, using a curve, it's going to eat the entire grid in 10 years or so. And that didn't happen because data centers and chips got more efficient. We figured out how to cool things better. And that, again, efficiency saved us from 2010 to 2019. And then something broke. And really what broke was the ability for chips and high performance computing and AI to get better at coding, computations, image classification, all the things that we might use a large language model now for. And it was the performance of AI and digitization got way better than people were expecting. And all of a sudden the demand started to skyrocket. So electricity demand from data centers in 2018 or 19 was 2% of total electricity consumption. Now, Chris, I love, every kilowatt hour is precious. Like, I don't get out of bed for 2% of electricity demand, right? I mean, and it's like, it's something, but we have to monitor it, but it's at 2%. And then now 4 years later, 5 years later, 2024, we're at 4% of electricity. So we doubled in the last kind of 5 to 7 years.
That's just AI.
Yeah, well, it's AI and data centers.
Okay,
so we have to make sure that we're bundling all together, and sooner or later, it's basically going to be the same thing. When we talk about data centers, it's AI plus the internet plus Netflix plus everything.
Right.
And so now we're at 4% of electricity generation, and so we're like, okay, I see some people bitten by zombies. I didn't get bit by zombies, but other people did. It's fine. I'm sure it's fine.
Right.
The projections are similarly wild now. It's, could be 12% of U.S. electricity demand in a couple of years. I've seen some that are higher, some that are lower. But what is clear is it's driving all of the investment in the energy land right now in a way that I haven't seen in my lifetime. And what's happening is a data center, an AI data center or a regular data center, just like a crypto miner, takes electricity, puts it through the factory, and turns it into money. And the value that has been able to generate is this giant kind of arbitrage opportunity. It's like I can plop a data center in this place with cheap electricity, and out pops dollars on the other side. And what is it's both an opportunity and a challenge. But on the challenge side, it's how do we think about public resources like electricity, where there's a market and you can pay to buy kilowatt hours, but somebody paying for dialysis machine or keeping their medication cold and has a fixed budget, they're just going to get outbid,
right?
If they're at the same price.
And right now, that's the way pricing works. I mean, it's just the price is the price. And if you're trying to run a dialysis machine or you're trying to make like the anime figure of your erotic dreams, you pay the same amount to do both.
And in some ways that is important because we don't want to discriminate against electricity use. And this actually came up in the White House when I was there, is what's a good use of a kilowatt hour versus a bad use?
Yeah, that's tough.
And who makes that determination and who checks? Because I don't want somebody saying, you know what, you shouldn't drive an electric vehicle or an electric bike. I'm an e-bike dad like you, Chris. I don't want somebody saying you shouldn't drive an electric vehicle because we have gasoline. It's fine. You're bidding up the price of electricity.
Right.
And so there's these thorny issues that we just haven't wrestled with that are really, I'm trying not to be alarmist. I feel like we're like steaming towards a brick wall here of something's got to give on the demand side, on the supply side, on the infrastructure side.
Can I ask, so I was just talking to my dad. We were just took a trip that was really fun together with my brother. And he asked me, sometimes someone asks you like a very straightforward, seemingly simple question. You realize like, oh, I can't answer that. And it makes you realize that you don't understand something. He was like, so why does AI use so much power? And I was like, well, there's a lot of chips and they're doing a lot of complicated computation. So like, it's just a lot. That's basically what I got. But I feel like I understand that the level of compute is enormous and, the amount of chips is enormous. And, when each little chip is using a certain amount of power, and when you have just a ton of them, they consume a ton of power. Is that basically the story?
And we're pushing electricity through a silicon chip that does computations. And those computations are helping people, optimize the electricity grid or design new materials or find new health problems that they're going to uncover, or explore for oil. Like there's other, the use of AI is something that we think about all the time, has positive and negative impacts on the climate depending on how what it's used for. But why does it use a lot of electricity? Is electricity is pushed through these chips. The demand for computations and the opportunities for them to do legitimate and useful work has increased. And then you have to cool these chips down. So it's like the electricity goes through the chips and then they get hot, just like your computer, your laptop gets hot.
Yeah.
You got to cool it down. And so there's a electricity energy for the chip. There's a cooling energy for the building.
Right.
And the growth here is everybody is racing to market. Like this is not a rational market decision here.
Yeah. And one wonders too, like I saw something the other day to someone talking about like this insane paper on analog computing that's using like LED lights through filters, which just absolutely blew my mind, but basically just getting off the digital paradigm of computing that we've been on since, just sort of, Charles Babbage, I guess, probably. But the idea that like, maybe some innovation comes along to bail us out of this, right? That you get more efficient. Right now we don't have it, and right now everyone's building voraciously. So you've got this like curve going up for the AI use. Then you've got the energy transition. So that's all this added demand being added to the grid. So now let's talk about supply. What does the supply picture look like? How quickly are we expanding the amount of energy we're producing?
The simple story of supply is that clean is fast. Clean has been fast. And part of the opportunity from the last administration in the Inflation Reduction Act was it accelerated the cost declines of solar and batteries, solar, wind, and batteries, but solar and batteries. And it's kind of easy to just, find a site, has good solar resources, put a battery next to it, and be competitive. And for the first time, the Inflation Reduction Act gave a standalone battery storage credit. And so that basically said, go build a battery, and you can make it cheaper with this tax cut. And I have to say, this is another trend that just blew me away as an energy analyst. Like, again, 10 years ago, would I have thought that there were multiple Hoover dams of batteries on the grid, like providing energy services? I knew it was possible. I just didn't think it was ever going to be cheap enough. And the just battery costs have dropped so fast that there's multiple times in Texas and California, it's like the evening is discharging batteries into the grid and displacing natural gas. Now, what that meant was 90+% of all of the capacity that we've been adding to the grid in the last couple of years, solar, wind, and batteries.
Wow.
A little bit of natural gas. We did build 2 nuclear plants, or turned on 2 nuclear plants,
Yep.
And still kind of advancing those types of resources. But solar, wind, and batteries are the story. And what we're seeing now from the Trump administration is not just indifference, like not just competition, but kind of active, like
Sabotage.
It's like a cartoon, like throwing down like thumbtacks in the road. Like it's like it's almost it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense for any reason. It doesn't help anybody, and that actively canceling offshore wind projects that are almost built.
90% complete in Connecticut, the one they just pulled the plug on.
And the Secretary of Interior has to personally approve renewables permits on federal lands. And there are ways that one would say is like, how do we make this as hard as possible or illegal to build solar and wind in the United States? They're doing it. And to me, so now we've taken pieces off of the chessboard that were our workhorses. Right. It's like we're like saying, okay, all the stuff that we were doing before, solar, wind, and batteries, let's slow down solar and wind as much as we can.
I mean, I just want to put a fine point on this. I mean, for the first 20 years that I covered climate, right, there was a dilemma, which was that fossil fuels were the cheapest, the most accessible and easiest way to power things, but they had this enormous unpriced negative externality, which is that they were putting carbon in the atmosphere that was heating the planet and going to cause all sorts of health problems, disruptions, ecological effects. Then you had these alternatives, but they were more expensive, they were less developed, they were harder to deploy. And so you were trying to figure out, like, how do we use policy levers where we can price in that externality and sort of put them in par. Now we're in a position where all of the alternative stuff is the cheapest and easiest to deploy at the margin. And we have a huge growing demand. And also that stuff doesn't pollute the planet in the same way and doesn't put carbon in the atmosphere. And the administration is actively trying to destroy the thing that is the cheapest, that is carbon-free, that is the easiest to deploy at a time when we need the maximal amount of things being added to the grid. It almost can't believe that they're doing it when you say it out loud, but it is one of the most perverse things I've ever seen in my life.
It's almost like a reverse carbon tax or something,
yes,
where
right.
in a way
yes.
that
yes, a carbon subsidy. Yes,
yeah. And on the external cost, there's also the air pollutant cost of fossil fuels that kills a lot of people in the United States and around the world. I want to put a fine point on this subsidy part because you know, in many places of the country, solar is the cheapest in new generation assets. It's easy to deploy. We still need lots of new geothermal and new nuclear and hydro and keep advancing work towards fusion. Like we need every possible thing that we are ever going to use that's going to generate a clean electricity, and we're also not doing that. So
Right.
it's not just that
Right.
it's that we've slowed down the stuff that's getting built. We're destroying the kind of the R&D infrastructure of the country that would deliver the types of longer term opportunities for cost declines in the other arena.
So okay? So I mean, there's a question about how much. I had Bill McKibben on the podcast a few weeks ago, and that's a great book and a very heartening one, invigorating book. Just both the drop in cost of solar and the deployment is just a remarkable story. I mean, I think we're adding a gigawatt globally a day now, where it took like 30 years or something to add our first gigawatt. So there's a sort of race between like the momentum of this technology and the Trump administration trying to kill it. And where do you sort of see that right now?
I started my career as an engineer working on big projects in New York. We worked on the subway reconstruction after 9/11, and I worked on the 7 extension from Times Square down to
That's
West
cool.
Midtown. And so like I've witnessed like how do big projects, go good or go well, and how do big projects, take longer and cost more and are more expensive. And that's the way I've been thinking about the energy transition is there's lots of great surprises that we've encountered. Cheaper solar, cheaper batteries. But I don't want to bet the climate on 7 miracles lining up, right? I
Yeah.
actually don't want to decarbonize by 2050. I want to decarbonize by 2040, and we might make it by 2050. And so the way that I view this topic is we're out of the window to be optimal, where we're like, we get our charts and graphs out and we say, this is the exact amount of subsidy, and anything better than that is distorting the market. And sure, we have to make sure that we are prudently using public resources. If we're trying to build out a grid to deal with climate change and to electrify all these new opportunities that we have in the country, we're going to have to go faster than the market is going to provide. And so solar, we should be making solar cheap and cheaper forever, like for my lifetime. There's not going to be a point where we should say, well, solar's made it, we're fine, we'll slow it down now, because we don't have that luxury,
Right.
Because we're going to need more stuff than we think we need.
We're also eventually going to probably want to like run a bunch of electricity to take carbon out of the air or like, deal with like our overshoot. I mean, if we get it to the point where we have essentially like, very close to $0 marginal cost carbon-free energy. One thing you could do with that is to try to, run the clock backwards a little bit. That if we go the current way, we're going to need some of that probably, and probably some to offset heavy industry and stuff like that too.
On that front, every climate plan, from an agency to a government, at the back, if you read the fine print, which is where I like to hang out in a report, there's like these climate IOUs. It's like, we're going to get to the end and then we'll clean up some stuff with the direct air capture and carbon removal.
Right.
And so everybody's writing these checks of, we owe you 3 gigatons of carbon removal, and nobody is saying, how do we scale that up?
Right.
And absolutely, like the cheap, clean, abundant electricity opens up way more options than we ever or would have for humanity. And we are not acting as a country to achieve that reality right now.
So you've got supply and demand. So the demand is going up, the supply is being artificially constrained, and the next generation research is being constrained. That gives you a pretty clear picture of what will happen to the price. Talk a little bit about the grid and moving energy around, right? Because this is where I've done podcasts on this before, and it's one of these things where like I sort of understand it while I'm talking to someone about it, but as soon as I leave the conversation, it doesn't quite stick. But we need to, I guess, what's the geographical imperative here, right? Like, there's huge parts of the country get a ton of solar and kind of ton of wind. Um, we want to be able to move energy efficiently and cheaply over distances if we need to. We're not doing that at all in the scale that we need to. So there was money in the IRA for some of that. There was a question about permitting reform, which ended up being kind of like a little bit orphaned. Where do things stand with kind of the grid and moving energy around in the way that we need to?
If I want to use the toaster in my house, if I want to make a hot pocket, right? You
Okay.
know, I need a in the microwave. A power plant somewhere in my region is increasing ever so slightly, and then it's moving onto the transmission system. So those big wires that we see up above us,
Yep.
those are moving electricity at high voltage from the power plant. Could be the solar field, could be a natural gas plant, could be a nuclear plant, to the city where I am. And then it leaves the big wires and goes down to the little wires. And the little wires are the ones that we see on the poles
Mm-hmm.
that are around our neighborhoods. Those are moving electricity inside of our communities, and then it eventually gets to our apartment buildings or our homes, and then comes into our house at a much lower voltage. That is the sleeper issue here in the electricity cost crisis, is the wires. And the reason is because we haven't had any electricity demand growth in the last 20 years, utilities have kind of put off reinvesting in those like last mile delivery of electricity because they're kind of getting by with the old capital that they had before. And now all of a sudden the demand is increasing, and they are rapidly deploying and fixing what is essentially our kind of our delivery of electricity service in ways that are adding lots of new cost to their bottom line. And when that happens, it passes it on to us. So the distribution system, the little wires, is almost half of utility capital expenditures and have been the driving factor for price increase of electricity. It's not that solar panels cost more. Solar panels cost less. It's electricity system is recapitalizing, and they're recapitalizing on the backs of customers because that's the model that we have here. And then you add to that the impacts of extreme weather and climate disasters. There's been $115 billion weather disasters over the last 5 years, kind of $750 billion in damages. You have wildfires, you have heat waves, you have hurricanes, you have flooding. And so utility systems are doing what they do best, which is build stuff and charge ratepayers to do that. But they're being stressed by additional demand, but they're also being stressed by, I have old infrastructure that was built not for this time. It was built for a different climate. It was built for a different demand profile. We normally, for electric vehicles, would like to charge them overnight. Most of the pole-mounted transformers, the little trash cans you see on the top of the telephone poles, those are the ways that electricity is enabled to come into our home.
Mm-hmm.
And they're supposed to cool down overnight because when they were designed for, it was like people use electricity every day. They're mostly sleeping at night. And so now we're going to say, no, we're going to, charge electric vehicles, and we're going to be doing, heat pumps all night. It's just, we're built for a different time. And infrastructure lasts so long that we have all these legacy assets just sitting around, and we're asking them to do what they weren't built for.
Okay, so this is new to me. So then, how do we deal with this problem? So the utilities basically have a huge amount of capital investment they need to do to update the systems within their domain. This has nothing to do with generation. This is just like getting it to the customer. And they're sort of doing it now in a kind of ad hoc, post-emergency way / plugging, fixing where they can. Those costs are going up, and that's what you're saying is being passed on to ratepayers, a big source of that, those increases we've seen. So what do we do about that? I mean, I don't think the Trump administration is going to do anything the right way, but what should be done about that?
Just to put a number on it, the the cost of the amount of capital investment from utilities in the distribution system. Again, the little wires and the transformers and the poles and the lines that are in your neighborhood. You look up, you see them all the time. It grew by more than 50%
Wait,
in the
what?
from 2019 to 2023. So a total
Okay.
growth of 50%, double the rate of inflation. So you have this, the price of eggs and the price of food and the price of housing, the price of insurance, all the things that are squeezing families. The price of transformers and the price of lines is eventually making it to a household's bill, energy budget, or household's financial budget.
Right. So if there's all this capital expenditure, which is like record-setting amounts of capex by the firms trying to build out AI, which is accounting for like an almost comical percentage of GDP at this point, particularly of growth, that basically one way to deal with this at a policy level is that locally you can create essentially sort of partnerships where you say, yes, you need this energy, you need this capital build out for your data center. Also, you need to build enough that it's not going to screw over the people that are basically just hanging on to the lights because they make minimum wage or trying to run a dialysis machine.
Absolutely. I mean, so normally a industry might come to town and they might sponsor the little league team or, build the football field somewhere.
Right.
And they should do that. That's just good opportunities to build community relationships. But what I'm saying is this is an industry that wants to move fast, that needs access to electricity, that is going to be bidding up resources. And they also need a better infrastructure. Their incentives are aligned to show up with lots of clean power and
Right.
build out the grid for that community, because that then enables their social license to operate.
What did the Inflation Reduction Act do about this problem? Like, I'm aware of there's a huge amount of spending that went to R&D. There's huge grants that went to a whole bunch of different organizations and nonprofits that essentially are working at this local level, including efficiency and weatherizing homes. There's obviously a huge tax credit structure on the generation side. Was there stuff around this part of the problem, the kind of utility build out part?
Again, this is something, even in climate, even after all these years, like the climate land, it's like you pick up a rock and there's like another program that nobody has heard about. And so the GRIP program, Grid Resilience Innovation Partnership, I think it's like $10 billion with a B. That's the budget of the EPA was build a more resilient grid all across America in rural areas and tribal areas. And that plus investments from the EPA and from the Department of Agriculture, there was lots of capital that were programmed and deployed to help with building a more resilient grid. The Inflation Reduction Act was also a giant resilience bill. And so we weren't really doing a lot of resilience before the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. We are just scratching the surface of what's needed. And so as you've alluded to in many times in your discussions around this, we did this in the 1930s for farms in the country. The Rural Electrification Administration gave loans to co-ops and other entities to say, we know it's not profitable for you to run a line to these farms because there's not that many people there, but it should be nice if all people in the country had electricity. And so in a span of 20 years, we electrified nearly all the farms. And we didn't have iPhones, so we didn't have computers. We just did it. And I got to believe that now, with the workforce that we have, with technology that we have, if we said electricity is the modern lifeblood, it's the 21st century highway system, we won't compete without a modern electricity grid. We should be investing from the public side and the private side to deliver it. That it's possible. We just haven't done it yet.
Do we have, when you were talking about these high voltage lines and talking about repairs, I mean, I'm always sort of blown away when I've been in disaster areas in the aftermath to see the linemen out. It's hard work, it's technical work, it's work that requires real expertise, but also has to be done under real time pressures, particularly in cases of disaster. It can be very dangerous work. Do we have the workforce to do that right now? Like, are there enough people that know how to do the kinds of things we need them to do for the build out that we would need?
It's really just represents the best of America. You see the empty highways and all the like the bucket trucks coming from the other states are like racing towards
Yeah.
fixing stuff, and it's hot. There's no power. It's very dangerous.
Yeah.
The line workers, enable us to have a modern electricity system here in the country. A lot of them are retiring, and there is opportunity for growth in this area. It is a huge way that good paying jobs, union jobs can grow in the United States is the build out of the electricity system and the maintenance of the electricity system. But we need the capital to drive it. Like we have to have new power plants and new transmission lines. We are notoriously bad at building new transmission lines on time. And there's all kinds of reasons for that, but we kind of the public doesn't care. It's like, go get it done, nerds.
Right.
Like go
Right.
build big things and deliver us the benefits. The workforce part is, we believed in the Biden administration and, happens to be true. Like the energy transition is the greatest opportunity for good paying jobs in the United States in, the next couple decades. And how do we make sure that we enable that for everybody? It doesn't happen on its own. And so we're kind of in this boat adrift right now where we're not planning for competition and national security and winning the future around electricity.
What do you think? Like, what is this drift? I mean, we're at a drift right now. Prices are going up. I think is going to be more and more salient. But you said before that we're sort of headed towards a wall. Do you see some sort of crisis or some inflection point or something that happens where this is not just some back burner issue that you talk about, on wonky podcasts, but suddenly sort of becomes central?
Like all of the indicators are pointed in the wrong direction. So the cost of the wire
Love to hear
system
that
is going.
sentence. I try to get as many of these. I love that.
It's great, right?
I hear that about 5 times a day from 9 different experts I talk to. That's all I hear all day.
You have this kind of massive demand increase driven right now by AI, but hopefully continue to drive from electric vehicles and heat pumps and factories. You have this underinvestment in distribution systems that are increasingly stressed by climate disasters and other disasters. You have a supply system that needs more power, and the administration is basically saying the only thing we're allowed to do is natural gas. Oh, and by the way, if you try to build a new natural gas plant, the turbines are so backed up on order that you won't get one delivered for a couple years.
Yeah, I've heard this, that you can't actually build these things right now.
So, I'm okay. Like in math, I can handle addition, right? Like we get harder than that. Like I can push it to a colleague to help me better. But like the addition part, less supply,
right,
and more demand,
right,
is bad. And we just everybody's kind of dancing around this in the regulatory space, in the grid that is in the Mid-Atlantic, so New Jersey, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and District of Columbia, and the Mid-Atlantic area. Some of their regulators and commenters are basically saying data centers are driving us towards an electricity crisis, that we are not building enough new supply to handle all this new demand that's happening. And we're kind of just ignoring it until the prices start rolling. Now, the thing to understand about electricity prices is they're generally increase not day to day for household customers, but kind of year to year.
Mm-hmm.
So your utility will come back either at 6 months or at 12 months or at 24 months and say, look at all the stuff we spent over the last 2 years, we're going to increase rates. So we're basically like baking in electricity rate price increases for a few years by not doing anything about it.
Right.
And already in Virginia, this is the thing that freaks me out. It's like in Virginia, remember I said that electricity from data centers is about 4% of U.S. electricity. In Virginia, it's 25%. And
Well, that's because Amazon has an enormous presence there, right?
yeah, you have Amazon, you have the government clients, but it's also
Right.
they had a nice, a favorable tax environment for this
Right.
because they've said this is an industry that's growing. We
Yeah.
want to attract it, like
Right.
anything else. If they wanted to do aluminum factories or steel factories, like the estate basically said we have a competitive advantage because of our customer base
Yeah.
and because of our environment here. But now you have communities that are kind of like no data centers is part of their kind of political environment.
Oh, absolutely.
And some, very often for good reasons, like we talked about in Memphis, where people are breathing pollution because if the electricity system can't keep up with the demand, companies are just opening up generators. I've heard, again, well, I've heard of stories, I haven't witnessed this, of folks just basically running natural gas generators, smaller generators for smaller data centers. That's going to start happening with bigger ones if the regulations start to continually be ignored or relaxed. And that's not good for anybody, right? It's not good for the communities. It's not good for pollution. It's not good for the companies long term.
I mean, part of what's strange in this area is like when there's one kind of energy price, the cost of gasoline, that is extremely transparent at some level. Everyone sees it all the time. You're constantly interfacing with it. And there's enormous political science literature evidence suggests that people hold basically this president responsible for it. I mean, this is like a very, very robust finding. Electricity is very different, it seems to me, partly because you got this thing called the utility company that sits there that no one really understands. Everyone kind of dislikes everywhere. It's a natural monopoly. It's both public and private. It's very regulated. It's a strange entity that sits in the middle of it that ends up also, I think, being a little bit of the heat sink for people's frustrations or anger, right? So it's not like Donald Trump's energy policy raised your prices. It's Con Ed raised your prices. Central Hudson raised your prices. With gas, people are like, no, Joe Biden raised the price of gas. That doesn't transfer because of the utility sitting there as the middleman in this. And I just wonder how that affects the politics of the whole thing, because the utility can turn around. No one wants to hear it from utilities. No one likes utilities. No one's like, man, you know what I love? My local electricity company. Like no one feels that way. And so I wonder how it messes up the kind of feedback mechanisms, right? Because what's going to happen is the prices are going to go up. What I'm hearing from you is a story in which like the drivers of the costs are not really emanating from the utility companies, although part of it may be that they've been coasting a little bit and not doing enough investment. So it's not like they're totally blameless. But the fundamental source of the run up in costs isn't coming from the utility companies. It's coming from structural factors outside them. But people are going to blame the utility companies, and the utility companies are going to say, well, they're going to give their whole spiel about why it's not their fault. And in some ways, it would be useful for the politics of the issue for people to listen to that. But I fear like they're not going to, and it's just going to be like, screw you, utility companies.
Utility bill, comes once a month, and it's kind of like the newsletter subscriptions that you might have. It's like, oh, I subscribe to this many, like I'm getting all this bills at one time.
Right.
And you forget about it on the day to day. As you mentioned, driving past the price. The utility interacts with the regulator. And so these are like the sleeper climate and energy policy makers of the country. There's not that many of them. And Charles Watt at Powerlines talks about how that the utility regulator, the Public Utility Commissioner, is the most important kind of climate and energy policymaker in the country that nobody's ever heard about. Like nobody campaigns for. In some states they're elected, some states they're appointed. Ultimately, that regulator is the one that's saying, good job, utilities. You spent this much on distribution lines, and we're going to approve that rate increase. And so the utility is not blameless, but the utility is acting in the instructions of the regulator. And if the regulator said, you know what, we're not going to do it like this, we're going to do it in a different way that is more pro-consumer, utilities would have to listen. They're a regulated monopoly. But we haven't yet leaned into state public utility commissions as really the leading edge of how do we deal with this? Who pays? Who benefits? Where's the risk? How do we deal with climate? Like, how do we make it affordable? These are all laid at the feet of utility regulators that nobody knows who they are. Nobody pays attention
I
to it,
couldn't name mine.
right?
I
Yeah,
gotta fess up.
you know, and they are also understaffed. They, there's a state capacity problem in many of these areas where they're just trying to do their best under enormous pressure from all different directions. And again, that's an easy way for a state to lean into, like, how to fix some of this is empower utility regulators to be creative, and maybe with some state money, maybe with some private money, maybe with some philanthropic money, like, go try something. Because right now, again, demand up, supply down, crisis coming. And governors will start to notice this. That's where I think is like the political piece is coming. Is like a governor is going to say, how much is electricity price increase in the state? Like, go fix it. And under those emergency conditions, I worry about, regulatory capture that says, I know what'll fix it, like 50 new natural gas plants, Jesus. Right? And those are the kind of the stakes that we have. There is an opportunity for the public to raise their voice here and say, this is the type of future we want. Don't raise my bills. Don't pollute my lungs. Like, build what I want so I can have cold drinks, hot showers, hot pockets, like Netflix, the stuff that we want, while not having it really in crisis mode.
How much can residential solar help with this?
So we talked a lot about the additions to demand from electricity. Electric vehicles, heat pumps on the residential side, electric stoves, electric dryers, all the things that we want. You can think about energy efficiency and residential solar as kind of reverse demand, right? It's reducing the total amount of demand that's happening. And I wanted to go pull the numbers. The behind the meter solar has doubled in the last 4 years. So it was small. So doubling from a small number is still small, but I think it was 1% of generation or demand, and now it's 2%. And so those are the things that are like these hidden crutches that we're adding to that are making it less bad for everybody. Now, behind the meter solar is expensive. We want to make it cheap. It's not the solution for everything.
Behind the meter, when you mean behind meter, you mean like rooftop?
Yeah, so like rooftop solar. Sorry. So I have solar panels that are on your roof or on your balcony, like you talked about with Bill. Those are electricity is used in my home before it even goes through my electricity meter. Right, it's behind the meter on my house.
There you go.
And some of it may go back on the grid, but ultimately is like, I'm getting electricity from my roof. I don't need to get it from the grid. Utilities, unsurprisingly, aren't super excited about this at all times, and there's different ways that we can incentivize and make sure that everybody's fired up about it. But I've come kind of past the point of what makes the best economic sense to the point of where are the band-aids that we can stick places easily to get us kind of ride through this challenge. And rooftop solar is a opportunity to reduce and blunt the demand growth from all the stuff that we want. And it should be easy to plug and play in America to do this. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of going through it right now, and it's pretty striking how the amount of regulatory hurdles, particularly compared to a place like Australia, where you call, like, as Bill documents in that book, and I've talked to Aussies who are like, it's true, you call and they come, 3 days later, they put it up. But people always, there's always this sense that, like, I feel like from energy wonks find like this idea of like distributed power, like this sort of hippie affectation that like it's just not enough, and like you need like the big load, you need base load, and but it's just not clear to me why you can't imagine a future 20 years from now where like every single building has rooftop solar, and that 1% goes to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to a big chunk of our power generation.
This is, as an energy wonk, that part is right, is that, rooftop solar is not going to save us, but rooftop solar might help us. And we have to, there's no possible thing that we should take off the table right now.
Yeah.
Like, we are in a near-term electricity crisis and a midterm, long-term climate crisis that is actively harming people right now. Like, the impacts from climate change harm people today.
See them all the time. Yeah.
And I am 100% on board with using community-based public policy to say we should help make it cheaper and easier for people to have solar on their roofs. And by the way, there was a program, Solar for All program. It was in the Inflation Reduction Act. It was $7 billion. And people don't really get, it's like you throw these Bs out here. It's like, yeah, sure, $7 billion. It's like, that would be
Enormous, yeah.
career defining. Like,
Yes.
2011,
Yeah.
if we got $7 billion
Yes.
for solar panels,
Yeah.
like we would like have a ticker tape parade.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
It was just like, part 107G of like 1,000 pages.
Right.
Again, Solar for All, $7 billion helped low income households have solar panels on the roofs and really cut their energy costs. Administration pulled it back or trying to cancel it. Right. Again,
The Trump administration.
Trump administration. Yeah. I come back to this as like, for what?
Right.
Like, what are we doing here in a way that is helping our members of our community, like, have some breathing room, like, live better lives, grow the economy, like the things that we say is like we want.
Right. But even if you're like, yo, those aren't our people, screw those low income people, which, by the way, is not the correct way for them to think, ethically, politically, but also, like, there are people that are going to benefit who are their voters. So just to be clear, but even if you are like, screw those people, it's all one grid. Like, that's the thing about this whole thing. You need more supply, and you gotta find it from somewhere. It's just totally insane to be taking it off, whatever your politics are, like, whatever, and however much you hate the hippies and however much you hate the solar and how much monomaniacally focus on how ugly wind is because you tried to stop a wind project by a golf course and you lost that, and you've been smarting about it for 3 decades in a way that's like downright pathological and unnerving. The fact is, you need everything you can get right now. It's just crazy to take it away.
It actively makes it more expensive for
everyone,
for everybody,
for everyone,
right? For every voter, right?
Yeah.
For every person. Taking clean energy out of commission for ideological reasons makes everybody's lives worse. And it's the same thing with, if I can go back to bikes, it's like a bike lane or a transit lane. When you have people that are in the bike lane and the transit lane, they're not on the road and they're not causing you traffic. And so there's like the ways that we don't think about society as a system anymore is really atomizing our actual experience with infrastructure in the country. Kostas
Samaras is a researcher in climate, energy, and emerging tech. He's the director of Carnegie Mellon's Institute for Energy Innovation, former chief advisor for the energy transition in the Biden-Harris White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. That I learned so much. Thank you very much for that.
Great to be with you, Chris.